Catherine, are we alive?
You assume you've changed so much, but have you really?
I don't know. I don't feel so different. The world sure does.
Of all the games to exist within the Amnesia-verse of run and hide, don't fight styled horror, very few have reached the height of this format in the same manner as SOMA. Originally released in September of 2015 via the aforementioned Amnesia developer Frictional Games, SOMA is, hands down, one of my favourite horror games to ever exist. One that I'd like to finally spend a little bit of time talking about. You take control of Simon, a seemingly ordinary guy who awakens to find himself trapped in the dilapidated underwater base of PATHOS-II. The opening chapters paint an apparently simple premise for a horror game. Figure out what's going on, dodge past the scary monsters, and hopefully get out alive. The usual stuff. But it becomes fairly obvious rather quickly that what this game initially tells you and where it ends up taking you are two very different places. To be honest, right off the bat, the gameplay is nothing to shout about. It recycles the run and hide format of Amnesia with wholly unremarkable results. To be blunt, you're not going to love the gameplay of SOMA, because in truth, it's easily the weakest element of the game. You sneak around or hide from the monsters because there is nothing else you can do, which is about as exciting as they get because visually they aren't all that remarkable either. It doesn't sound like high praise, does it? Why would this game be so special to me if the game part of playing it was so lackluster? Well, it's because even in spite of that, SOMA's story is so truly unconditionally brilliant in its execution that it overcomes virtually any qualms that I might have with its gameplay.
Could you do it? Kill a robot like that?
I get attached to them too. I'm not a monster. But in this case, it had to be done.
He was talking. I mean, he was delusional, but he seemed sincere. Present.
The voice acting, for instance, is outstanding. The environmental storytelling and design is fantastic, and the subtextual horror littered throughout this game is easily far more terrifying, in my opinion, than any monster encounter of SOMA ever could be. At its core, if I were to summarize it in one sentence, SOMA is a game that is doing its absolute damnedest to make you question what it means to be human, about our decisions as a species, and the consequences of those decisions. As you continue to explore the underwater base, you encounter various events and characters that results in a downward spiral which isn't immediately horrific, and yet by the time you've started to grasp what's actually happening to Simon, you'll have already spent a pretty decent amount of time thinking about what's occurring around the player, which is also the moment where the game's story and atmosphere usually starts to really get its claws into you. It's throughout your exploration of the base that multiple audio logs or scattered remnants of the previous inhabitants can be found. And while this sort of gameplay mechanic can certainly be irritating or come across as a tad lazy in other games, when it comes to SOMA, these feel like fleshed out, valid additions to the story. As opposed to other horror titles where the majority of these notes are just simple, vague summaries of how a bunch of people got torn to shreds, finding an audio log or memo in SOMA imparts a legitimately interesting piece of information to the player. You want to know more about what's happened here, because a lot of it isn't told outright to you. If the player doesn't bother picking these up, there's a lot that can be missed. And so the more of the base's history you discover, the more unnerving your overall situation ultimately becomes. In particular, an element of the game crucially linked to this is its use of memories. Early on in the game, Simon obtains the ability to access the PA systems and bodies of PATHOS-II's inhabitants, and thereby learn a little bit more about what's happened, which results in these harrowing glimpses into the perspective of those dealing with a situation that they don't truly understand or even have a hope in hell of surviving. While the monsters can at times be effective in providing tension, and certainly prevents the game from slipping into monotony by just essentially being a walking simulator, the biggest question throughout a lot of SOMA is a simple one. What the hell happened to PATHOS-II? The monsters are a seemingly obvious answer, but where did they come from? What caused it all to go so wrong? Why did the sophisticated security systems of the base fail so spectacularly? Alongside this, the deeper into PATHOS-II you reach, the atmosphere becomes continually more dense and gorgeously claustrophobic. Even in the wider areas, you feel small and helpless. And it's in these moments that the soundtrack, while effective in enhancing the glitchy aesthetic of SOMA's monster encounters, can also be beautifully melancholic, especially when the more emotional beats hit throughout the story. The sound design is really solid too. Listening to the soundtrack separately is an enjoyable experience, with long-term Frictional Games composer Miko Tamiya returning to provide SOMA's music, but in doing so it also makes you fully appreciate all the creaks and groans of your surroundings. The sparking electrics, the distant bangs and howls, the gurgling of water pouring in ominously nearby. They complement each other really nicely, instilling a somber overtone that never quite goes away.
This was never about certainty. It's about hope.
I don't want to spoil anything major, but Simon's journey is legitimately miserable in a lot of ways, and only becomes more so the more you think about it. As already mentioned, the game gradually feeds pieces of information to you that brings the dire nature of SOMA's world into terrifyingly sharp focus, highlighting something that could potentially happen to our world. And if it does, we wouldn't have a single chance in changing it. For all our technological superiority, there's only so much we can do as a species to survive the forces of nature, and the incredible voice acting throughout this game brings so much of this story element to life. You're presented with a character dynamic between Simon and another quote-unquote survivor, which initially seems friendly and cooperative, if albeit a little tense, and you root for these characters. You want them to succeed. But the game isn't interested in any simple resolutions, and it makes that clear pretty early on. To be honest, I have a firm rule of only playing this game once every few years, because every time I do, I notice things I didn't notice before. Elements to the environmental storytelling or character interactions that I maybe didn't pick up on previously, which then suddenly click together on my third or fourth playthrough and proceed to hit me like a train wreck. I never want that feeling to go away, because to me, SOMA is a special horror game. It does with its story what so many horror games fail to do. The actions of the main characters, even with good intentions, have consequences, as did the actions of PATHOS-II's previous inhabitants. And these consequences might not be something that either you or Simon recognize straight away. It takes its time building towards a closing chapter that punches you in the gut with everything it has, leaving you alone to think about all that's happened as the credits roll. There are many an Amnesia fan out there who will tell you that The Dark Descent is Frictional Games' magnum opus, their masterpiece. I'm gonna go against the grain and tell you that even in spite of its lackluster gameplay and some admittedly awkward scripted sequences, SOMA easily stands above, at least in my eyes.
When I was back in Toronto, even the worst case, the darkest futures I could predict, they at least included my previous life somehow. I feel so uprooted. There's nothing here that I recognize, nothing that makes me feel like I belong. Even if we make it to the Ark, would it be any different? I'd still be alone. No friends. No family.
And sure, I'll happily admit that I'm undeniably biased. I'm a huge fan of existential horror, and SOMA is the exact kind of experience which legitimately forces you to think about your own mortality, to make you think about what it actually means to be human, to confront the fact that one day, all of this will be over. Our world and existence as we know it is limited, finite. And while the story does allow for some small semblance of hope via the tiniest form of technological preservation of our species, and there is some genuine beauty in that concept, it's also scary. If there's one thing SOMA does absolutely right, it's the game's acknowledgement of the fact that if we're not careful, our final day might end up coming around the corner far sooner than it needs to, Simon's journey is one that shows us that we need to cherish our world and our existence as human beings, because nothing lasts forever, and before we know it, everything can change. The future is unknowable and terrifying, and if the cards are down and humanity loses, it's in its presentation of a situation similar to this where the game truly shines. This, to me, is where an experience like SOMA can be so effective, and just shy of 10 years on, when the world seems so full of noise and struggle and negativity, it remains just as effective, if not more so than it did in 2015. To me, this is why I love this game. This is the lasting horror of SOMA. Hey everybody, thanks ever so much for watching the video. This is going to be a new format that I'm trying out moving forwards, which is something that I've been mulling over for a while now. My creative energy and free time in balancing 2 jobs and having other things going on in my life has not left a lot of room to make videos, so I think the long form video stuff is going to have to take a backseat for a long while. I don't want to completely stop, however, so if you enjoy this sort of thing, please let me know. I have a bunch of ideas for this kind of format and I'm really looking forward to giving it a go. In the meantime, I'd like to thank my amazing top Patreon supporters, who have been with me even through months of silence and I don't deserve them. Game Master, Dark Raptor 86, BFD Survivor, and Shkotsky. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next video.